And we are live. Welcome to Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, formerly carried on the Starcom radio network, now carried on my YouTube channel because I was allergic to fame. I am Brenton Lengel. I am a poet. I'm a playwright, former activist with Occupy Wall Street and the Youth International Party, I'm an anarchist and the author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, the second issue of which is out, and the first backers of the Kickstarter actually got it this week, so that's super exciting. And joining me now is BZ Douglas, movement journalist, a guy that I met quite a long time ago as an artist in New York City, and has gone on to have quite an impressive career, not just as an artist and host of the BZ Listening podcast, but also you've been doing like some really incredible movement journalism. I guess, is this movement journalism or is this really more investigative journalism that you're doing here?
Well, I mean, it is investigative, but I mean, I say movement journalist because that's kind of what I got into it is to, I'm just throwing away any pretense of necessarily objectivity. In terms, it's like I'm in, I want to see the movement succeed, like the movement for Black Lives, or I align with a lot of leftist movements, things like that. So, and that's given me a lot of credibility with sources. And at the same time, it's like I'm trying to hold the movement accountable. And when there's shady operators, like my first story, you want to call those out. So, yeah, I mean, it's investigative, but like I said, I kind of wear my bias on my sleeve, biased but fair.
Yeah. Now this is unfortunately, when you told me about this, I was like, oh God, not another one. This is about the police, and I'm going to say police in quotations, killing of Luke Stewart, yet another killing of a African-American man by a white officer. So if you can let me know, this occurred in Euclid, Ohio, and this is a complicated story. There's a lot going into it. So can you just tell the readers, if they're not familiar with this, because I believe I didn't hear about this until you broke the story to me. Yeah. What are the major factors in this case? What happened, and how can we stop it from happening again?
Well, this all started when I started working on a documentary about Luke Stewart, who is the victim in this case, and it was basically the way this article came about, and I'll lead into how I discovered it and what the story became. So Luke Stewart was a man who was sleeping in his car on the street. He was trying to find a friend's house to crash at, couldn't do it. So he pulled on the street, parked, went to sleep it off, whatever. He couldn't get home. And so a woman,
as many of us did when we were in college.
It's a completely innocuous thing. And so this woman noticed the car and she was getting ready for work, and she called into the Euclid police and said there's a suspicious vehicle she doesn't know that's just idling with its parking lights on. And so these two officers, Louis Catalani and Matthew Rhodes, were dispatched, and basically they pulled up, they peeked around in his car, they saw that he what looked like a half-smoked joint in the top of a wine bottle, and decided that, oh, we're going to pull this guy out of the car, which is something the Euclid police apparently do a lot. They violently yank people out of cars. So the one officer, Catalani, went to the driver's side door, knocks on the window. And it's also important to note, at no point did these men turn on their red and white lights. And that's important because that automatically activates their dash cams, and it's department policy that they should do that on every stop.
Yeah.
So they didn't do that. They turned on what's called their takedown lights, these really bright, blinding lights. And I believe Catalani had his flood light, the one that's attached to the side of his door, shining into Luke's car. So when he knocks on the window, all Luke sees is this silhouetted man, honestly.
Yeah,
and he's
straight
groggy.
out of a freaking horror movie.
Right. And so there's no way to be certain that he even knew that it was police that were banging on his window. Yeah. And at no point, and this is from, I've listened to their full interviews with the Bureau of Criminal Investigations, the BCI, that investigates cases like these. So I listened to their entire depositions, and at no point do either of them ever identify themselves as police. So anyway, Catalani knocks on the window, waves. Luke groggily waves back and then sits up and starts his car. And Catalani immediately opens the door and starts grabbing Luke, like wraps his arm around his neck. He's pulling him like in what's called a mandibular lock. And then the Rhodes climbs into the passenger side and starts shoving him to try and get him out. And Catalani can't do it. So Luke Stewart panics. Whatever. This is startling. It's completely understandable. He starts his car, he gets it into drive, and he starts trying to move forward. Yeah. And Catalani,
from his perspective here, he's being attacked by two unknown men who shined a giant light on him and have just gone in, like they've gone from zero to what he assumes and what will possibly become murder very, very soon.
Yeah. So he starts moving forward, and then what happens is that Catalani has to disengage because his doors, he's about to get wedged between the police car in front of Luke and the door. So he jumps out, he backs off. Rhodes decides that the smart move is to jump all the way into the car. And to just kind of boil this down to get to the end of this tragedy, here's what Matthew Rhodes' decision-making process was. Here's how his training kicked in, and training will be a big part of this story. He starts punching Luke in the head to try and get him to stop. Then that doesn't work, so he takes out his taser. He takes his taser out, shoots Luke, but screws up using the taser, and he leaves the safety on basically. So it's just the needles go into him and no shocks. Also, I want to bring to attention the intelligence of, if your goal is to stop someone from driving a car recklessly, I don't think tasing them while their foot is on the gas is a great idea. So the taser doesn't work. So then he decides the right move is to punch Luke in the head with the front of the taser. Rather than doing what's called dry stunning, which is where you can actually just press the taser into someone's body to get the taser effect. No, he doesn't do that. He just starts punching Luke with a taser in the face. Then that doesn't work. And all this happens in the space of like barely a block. And Luke never really gets above like 25, 30 miles an hour. So then Rhodes decides his only option is to pull out his gun, and he shoots Luke twice in the chest. Another bullet hits his wrist, and then the fatal one goes into his neck. And it's really, I've just gone over this and really tried to, like meticulously listening to the story and tried to imagine it. And what's crazy to me is that at no point does Rhodes think that maybe this is an unarmed man and he's panicking. Maybe I'll sit down, buckle my seatbelt, and say, look, this got out of hand. Let's slow down, reason with someone, No, he decides that he's got to go all out. There's no answer to this situation but force. And so that's where the story was. And Luke's case went, there was a lawsuit against Rhodes, and he has skated by that using qualified immunity, is
of course he did
here all the time.
Yeah.
So what came out prior to the story I broke today was in the lawsuit, the firm Friedman and Gilbert that's representing the Stewart family, they discovered they requested Euclid Police's training materials, and in those training materials they discovered there was the opening slide to use of force has this really tasteless graphic of like the kind of like the style like men's room figures, men's and women's room figures, just of a police officer holding a baton over someone that's lying on the ground, and it says Euclid PD, serving and protecting the poop out of you. And then later in the presentation, there's a link to the Chris Rock video from like the early 2000s where it's satirically saying like how to telling black people how to avoid getting beat up by the police. And it's, you know, it's basically stuff like don't be black. But they shared that this was part of their training, and every serious person I've talked to, you know, has pointed out there's no room, there's no place for humor like that.
Yeah, when you're
use of force training.
Officers.
And it's also interesting in the training, there is about 200 pages, or I don't know, 150, something crazy, just on taser usage. Like if there's one thing Rhodes should have understood how to use, it was a taser, just going off of the amount of training in there. So that was the first thing that was discovered prior to my investigating. And then when I started digging into this, kind of at the behest of Black Lives Matter Cleveland, I had interviewed one of the co-founders and we had stayed close. And he mentioned that he would really appreciate, you know, he's looking for someone to work on a documentary about Luke Stewart's story. So I have a friend who lives nearby who's actually a director and a filmmaker, and he has been working on with me to co-produce and direct this piece. So in our investigation, I also discovered when I looked into Euclid's annual reports that several years running, they had commissioned the training of Lieutenant Dave Grossman, the killology expert, his bulletproof mindset training, which is just all it is. It's 3 hours of inducing panic in officers that they're all under threat at all these things that do happen in intense situations. But the way he frames them, it's always like, these are the things you'll want to know when you're testifying about getting out of trouble. You know, he doesn't directly say that, but it's implied.
This killology guy has been the cause of like so many deaths, like you know, allegedly, in case somebody's watching, you know. But that's my from the facts of what I've heard. You know, this is a guy who was, I believe, a former Green Beret, but he never actually saw combat.
Nope.
And then just proclaimed himself an expert in killology and went around talking to cops about how they're sheepdogs and they need to protect the sheep from, you know, the wolves. And of course, you know, this whole thing, Robert Evans Behind the Bastards did an excellent deep dive on him that I recommend everybody check out. But like, this guy has been one of the major people behind like this rash of police killings, because if you go in and you train police officers and you tell them, you know, that they're in this huge amount of danger and that they need to be ready to kill to defend the sheep, you know, like they're going to fly off the handle and they're going to do crazy stuff like this. Like, I can't imagine thinking that like it's a good idea to go up on a sleeping man in a car, blare a light at him, and then immediately attack him without even announcing yourself. And, you know, I can't even think what's going through these officers' heads at this time, because this is clearly like, I know they're not trained well, but there's like not being trained well, and then there's just like insane stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing about Grossman is that he relies on a lot of debunked studies. He often cites this I think it's SL Marshall study that was cited about like how many officers don't actually fire. It was like World War II, but it was completely debunked. But he still cites it all the time. And the man's he's got a murder fetish, in my opinion. I mean, I've seen him do I've watched live streams that are from his house, and his whole back wall is like knives and guns and weapons. The man just fetishizes violence. Yeah. Anyway, so
this is a person he probably wanted to get into, allegedly again. He probably wanted to get into the service because he wanted to kill someone. He wanted that thrill, and when he didn't get to kill somebody in the military, he just said, well, the next best thing is I'll try to teach other people to kill people.
Oh, the other thing about Grossman, he is one of the people that really pushed out the idea into the mainstream that like video games and violent behavior is linked.
Oh, he was he was the guy.
Yeah, he was
Jack,
all over that. Yeah, he's a big factor in that becoming, you know, a thought virus. It's like I think video games can be detrimental if you make your whole world about video games, but I don't think they make you violent. I've played violent video games my whole life, and I abhor violence.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a big difference between, violence as it happens on the screen and violence as it happens in real life. Like, you can maybe get to a point, like you play a lot of Call of Duty and you fetishize the military and decide like it'd be a great, cool thing to get into the military, like Call of Duty. But like, at the same time, like it doesn't really prepare you for like actual killing or actual violence in much the same way that playing Street Fighter does not prepare you to go into like a full contact karate match.
Yeah, I can testify to that firsthand, man. That didn't work out at all. So that's where like the extent of like what I had uncovered just digging on my own into documents I could get my hands on. Then, so for this documentary, we started, we were interviewing different people. We interviewed Luke's sister. We interviewed Richard Montgomery, a gentleman. He ran for mayor of Euclid in 2019 and was really almost as a direct response to Luke's killing. And Luke was also bookended by two major cases. Before him was a gentleman named Lamar Wright, who turned into a driveway and stopped because he had to make a quick phone call, and it happened to be the driveway of a possibly like known drug house. And these two officers, Officer Vashon Williams and Kyle Flagg, rushed up out of nowhere, threw his door open, tased him immediately, and because they thought he was reaching for a gun, he was reaching for his colostomy bag, which then ruptured because he was just recovering from surgery. And that case is moving its way up, and actually it looks like qualified immunity is not going to save those officers for now. Right now, where it's at in the appellate,
we really need to get rid of qualified immunity. Like do
you know the history of it?
I've heard a little bit about it. I think you probably know.
In a nutshell, in the shorthand of it, it was created to help Black people after there was Klan infiltration of the police, and I forget the exact details of it, but now it's been completely flipped, where it's used to protect the police from any litigation against mostly African Americans. So anyway, I interviewed.
So essentially, like, it was created because there might be Black police officers that are going after the Klan, and the communities at that time would try to go after those Black. I'll
mess up the history if I try and get it. I just Richard Montgomery was actually talking about this at the press conference, so I don't want to misquote the history, but it is depressingly ironic, as irony tends to be in real life.
Well, I think it goes to show something that I think a lot of people don't understand, like a lot of liberals don't understand. And they don't understand that there are the rules and that there is power. And that has an effect on how the rules are realized and whether they're enforced or whether they're not. I think the country, with regard to Trump and how he's been flouting both rules and norms and laws, has helped open a lot of people's eyes up to that. But that was something that I remember I figured out very early in my life. I think in college was when I first started to realize, like, oh no, people don't actually follow the rules. It more or less has to do with how much power an individual has, whether or not a rule gets followed or enforced. Now we've got a couple comments in the chat, by the way. One is from Eric. Hey, Eric. And he's mentioning that it's sometimes nerve-wracking walking by the police, and I totally agree, particularly for people of color. Like, I don't like being around the police, period, but I tend to do fairly well with them. We also have Robert in the chat, who is a soldier, actually, who served in combat. He says he has a copy of On Killing, and it is bullshit. So thank you for that, Robert.
I've heard from some law enforcement officers that say there's some valuable things in it, that aren't related to killing and have to do with, like, maybe dealing with killing. One of the last things I'll say about Grossman that I found really disturbing in his presentation was
he is a gross man.
He is a gross man. And he talks about that there's a thing called post-traumatic growth, and that people have, you can go through a trauma and grow as a person because of it. And that is a real thing. But the way he talks about it he almost says like it's like an enticement, like, hey, you might be worried about killing someone, might mess you up, but you might actually end up being a better person for it.
So go kill away. Jeez.
Yeah.
That is nuts. Like,
so,
this actually makes me think back to a mutual friend of ours, Captain Ray Occupy Lewis. If you remember, for those of you guys who are listening who may not be familiar with Ray Lewis, he's the former Philadelphia police captain who was arrested with Occupy Wall Street back in 2010. Jeez, 10 years ago. And he went on to have a very incredible career, like as a activist, just going around doing his best to help people who were struggling against the system and against the police, and also to, kind of be a means for activists to understand the police. And I don't remember if it was you, but he did a speech at the Yippie, and somebody asked him, the Yippie being a former radical space in New York City, the Yippie Museum from the Youth International Party. Somebody asked him, like, what's the deal with like police brutality? And what I remember he said was, what the problem is that when they select their officers, they go and they select officers and they give them a personality test. And the personality test asks you questions that don't really have a right or a wrong answer, but it grades you on a scale of like 0 to hard ass. So sensitive on one end, hard ass on the other, technical terms. And that they want to get people that are a little more on the hard ass side, because, being a cop is not the most dangerous job in the world. Like, it's more dangerous to be a garbage man than a cop. It is more dangerous to be an Uber driver than a cop. But like, cops, it's very emotionally taxing because you're dealing with everybody on their worst day when you go through it. And there's so often, you're going in and you're dealing with suicides and you're dealing with wife beatings and all that kind of stuff. And so what happens is that they found that if they got people who were more on the sensitive side, oftentimes these people would spend a year or so on the job, and then they couldn't stand it anymore and they'd quit. And the department and the city would say to themselves, actually, that's a bunch of, that's a bunch of money and time that we wasted training this person who just quit. So let's get the hard asses and put them out there. But what they don't realize, according to Ray, was that the job itself hardens you. So if you come in there as a hard ass already,
if you're an 8, you're going to be an 11.
Yeah, exactly. You turn into a freaking Terminator. Mm-hmm. So, he said one of the big things that people can do to deal with the problems of police killing and police beatings and stuff is, what they need to do is they need to select and be aware that if the person stays in the job, they're going to go on. Because honestly, it's more expensive for the cities in the long run when they're beating and killing people and getting sued for millions than losing a couple of officers that seemed promising but just couldn't handle the job emotionally. But also, he said that they needed to improve their screening for psychopathic and sociopathic personalities, since these people are attracted to law enforcement.
Oh, I've said that many times, that I really worries me that like the police department is has the same sort of kind of siren call that the priesthood has for pedophiles, but it's for psychopaths who are like fetishizing violence. It's like, oh, that's the job for me.
Well, they got that town in Kentucky that they put the Punisher skull on all of their police vehicles. Mm-hmm. And that's crazy because, first of all, the Punisher is literally a cop killer. But second of all, they're signaling that what they see themselves as is not a police officer so much as someone who takes revenge via murder. And it's this ridiculous machismo that's really made its way into cop culture and like warrior culture, and it's garbage. It's just garbage. It's one of the reasons why I advocate, defund, abolish the police, and put something better in its place. A lot of people think when people talk about defunding or abolishing the police, it's just you just get rid of the police and you don't do anything. The idea is break that toxic culture.
Yeah,
And also, honestly, break the police unions, because they're a big part of this as well, in my opinion. So a lot of them simply can't be reformed. I mean, if you'll remember, the police union tried to take away Captain Ray Lewis's pension, like just because
I forgot about that.
Yeah, with Occupy, just because of his political opinions and the way he expressed them, they tried to take away his retirement. Like,
yeah, they protect you if you're the kind of police they want. If you're the kind of police that rocks the boat, then they are going to come at you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So I see in the chat, I've got Rigel saying, I was an Uber driver and a pizza delivery driver. I'm braver than cops. Yes. And in RJ in the chat, they just fired a guy here for not carrying a taser or a baton, just extra ammo. I'm not quite. Like as in he didn't actually carry any of the non-lethal ones. He got rid of that. You
weren't loaded up.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad they fired that guy.
Yeah, well, that's kind of good if he's just not taking any of his less, non-lethal deterrents with him. So let's see, where was I? Oh yeah. So we're investigating this, and we're conducting interviews, and we interview the attorney of Lamar Wright because the thing started out narrow about Luke Stewart, and then the scope just widened to be like, we got to make a whole thing about the whole Euclid department. Yeah. And so when we were done interviewing him, and we asked him specifically about the Grossman training, because we had uncovered that the lawyers defending these people against Euclid weren't aware of that. And once we brought up the subject of training, this one attorney said, like, I got to put you on the phone with Mariah Crenshaw. And that is where my story today breaks. Mariah Crenshaw is just one of the most amazing citizen activists that I've personally encountered. When she first took me on the phone and explained what she had uncovered, my jaw hit the floor. And then as I did more background on her and found, that all the different types of activism and advocacy she has worked on, going back to the financial crisis, she was actually doing a lot of forensic accounting around predatory lending, to the point where Acorn, before it got blown up, people from there asked her to come in as an expert and an analyst, and they ended up sending her to Washington several times to testify before representatives and senators. And she impressed John Edwards so much that when he came through Cleveland and campaigning in 2008, he asked if she would give him a walking tour of East Cleveland and describe how the predatory lending has affected her neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty incredible.
She did work that directly contributed to Cleveland's consent decree, connecting DOJ lawyers and things like that with the right people in the community. She was also thanked for her contributions to Serial's season 3, that's focused almost entirely on the Cuyahoga County courthouse, and Euclid to an extent. So I get introduced to Mariah, and I'm going to try and think of the easiest. This is my first time having to verbally boil all this down.
Yeah, because this is a complicated case. For those of you who are wondering, the case is linked in the description of the video. So if you want to read this for yourself, if things sound a little like, wait, what? All of this stuff, it breaks it down into moving parts. But let's hear this from you, because this blew my mind.
I can give you the short version of it is essentially, there was a law enacted in 2007 in Ohio that stipulated that all police officers, all peace officers of every agency, every law enforcement agency in Ohio are required to take 24 hours of continued professional training, CPT. Mm-hmm. And these courses consist of things like de-escalation, trauma-informed policing, dealing with people with mental crises, all of the nonviolent stuff is like what they started mandating you have to take. And if you do not take these by the end of the calendar year, you are automatically placed into what's called cease function. And if you are in cease function, you are no longer a police officer. You cannot enter in a license plate into leads. You cannot carry a gun. You cannot make arrests. And anytime you do that, it is a felony. You are impersonating an officer, and you have no right to qualified immunity. So how did Mariah discover this term cease function? Well, she was helping out East Cleveland they had a really problematic officer that a lot of residents wanted to get the hell off of the force. So she started digging into him, requesting all his records and training. And she's pretty sure this got sent to her by mistake, but in the files she got was a cease function letter. And in all her years, she'd never heard of this. Her father was a major civil rights and criminal defense lawyer here in Cleveland. And she, was really close with him, paid close attention to his work. He'd never heard of this either. And
so it seems like it's something they passed and then just swept under the rug because they didn't want people figuring it out.
Well, these cease function letters, a lot of times they're supposed to go to directly to the mayor or the law director. And a lot of times they go to the chiefs and prosecutors who just tuck them away. And so the thing about going into cease function too, is that you then have to take, if you want to become a police reinstated, before a certain amount of time, you can take a refresher course. After a certain amount of time, you have to go all the way back through basic training.
Yeah, it's as if you've never been a police officer.
Exactly. So when she discovered this one officer's cease function letter, she figured out how to basically piece together which officers were in cease function without getting her hands on those letters, sending in requests to the Ohio Police Officer Training Association, OPATA. So she requests from OPATA, and they're kind of like the linchpin of where this all gets completely screwed up because of how they work. So OPATA gets like a police chief at the end of the year. He just sends them this spreadsheet with all of his officers' names and a yes, no, or whatever. Yes, they completed their training. Just that's all it is. No more details. They send that in an OPATA. OPATA looks at him and goes, cool, bro. And so she'll request that from them, but then she'll request like that spreadsheet that they get. But what they don't do, they don't check.
Yeah.
And she started checking. So she started requesting from, she started with East Cleveland and requested the training certificates for every single officer in that department. And what she discovered was that about 24 officers were in cease function. And Ohio allows for anyone to charge someone with a crime. If you file an affidavit, it then gets sent to a judge who will look at it and say, yeah, crimes were committed, and they send it to the prosecutor. And with East Cleveland, a judge looked at it, said, yeah, there's felonies here. Sent it to a prosecutor who in our county is, I'm not sure if at the time it was Michael O'Malley, but it is now. And he's as problematic as the last person, did nothing with it. So then she has expanded her investigation into every agency in the state.
This is something we should. So this is something I learned covering the Cecily McMillan trial. And that is that prosecutors are very, very reluctant to ever go after police in any way, shape, or form, because they rely on a good reputation, like a good relationship with the police department to continue to do their job and their job is put people in prison. And, the way that DAs and prosecutors work is they work on a system of I am successful if I put a lot of people behind bars, and sometimes you can leverage that into becoming a senator and probably, vice president of the United States with Kamala Harris.
Careerist prosecutors are one of the biggest problems we have. Yeah, the ones who are like, I need to punch up those numbers. In Ohio, and it's really bad here. That's one of the things that I hope a lot of leftists are going to learn about, like their disappointment in this election is like, stop putting all your energy into the presidency. If we can put that energy into getting in every county a better prosecutors elected, better judges, that's going to transform America a lot quicker than I think even Bernie could.
Yeah, I would agree. That's one of the things that gets me very frustrated with the Democrats, the Democratic Party, and just like Democrats do not understand power. They don't. They're like me before I realized in college that people don't follow rules. You know, a lot of the time they seem to think that it just matters that you have the rule and then nothing else. Tunnel vision on it. So yeah, this is a huge issue here. So let's keep going. There are 24 police officers who are essentially impersonating police officers. They have literally committed felonies. The prosecutors have declined to do absolutely anything about it because they like having a good relationship with the police. Continue.
So that didn't, she didn't get discouraged by that and spent the next year, over the last year, she has been requesting records from every single agency in the state, getting the Opana records for all, I think she sent out something like 900 requests in the last 3 weeks. So what she discovered that my article focuses on is that, and this is where a lot of her forensic accounting work comes in really handy, because she started looking into Matthew Rhodes, and she found that
Matthew Rhodes being the police officer,
officer who killed Luke Stewart.
Yeah.
And so she looked at, he was hired initially by a department in a city called Kirtland Hills. And then he transferred to Maple Heights, and he actually kind of dual worked there. And then it wasn't until 2016 he was sworn in Euclid. And what she uncovered was he had no CPT for 2014. And then none was reported, I believe, in 2015. He did take some what are called EOPATA online classes
which means he was sitting there reading something and just clicking.
Yeah. And those cannot count towards CPT. It's in the law. It has to be an in-person instructor and other than online.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's problematic about these online courses, some of them will be a domestic violence course, and it's 3 minutes long, and they submit that and then claim it was an hour credit.
Wow. And you know what's crazy about that is I remember I had to do an online course on training with my previous company, just on sexual harassment, in the workplace, and including trans folks and they, them pronouns and stuff. That was 30 minutes. And you had to go through it. You had to download. I had to do it twice because I forgot to download the application at the end. So that's me for my job, just managing a couple of people in low stakes situations. Whereas what we've got, these are police officers with guns who can and do kill people. And they're going in for 3 minutes on domestic violence online and saying it was an hour.
Yeah. So that's another thing I forgot to mention about East Cleveland is that, and for those who don't know, East Cleveland is its own city, which is because of a lot of fucking racism. But so she did manage to, she forced the OPATA, the commission, the OTC, she forced them to audit East Cleveland, and then they had to pay back more than $10,000 in reimbursement fees, because when they send up and say our officers took all these trainings and we paid X amount for the training, and then they get paid back. So there was at least that happened in East Cleveland. And this, so what she's discovered here with Officer Rhodes, and what happened on Monday was her and Richard Montgomery both filed affidavits charging Matthew Rhodes with homicide, impersonating a police officer, assault. They just stacked every charge they could find against him. They also charged his former police chiefs with dereliction of duty, and in some cases fraud, for the same reason of that reporting that he had taken hours which he did not take, which they were not entitled to reimbursement for. So this is kind of the opening shot in something that from what I can see, has the potential to shatter qualified immunity for a sizable portion of officers. And in Mariah's opinion, she thinks that they're looking at like 40 to 60% of officers in the state may have fallen into cease function at some point and never did the required work to actually get properly reinstated.
Yeah, see, so this is I'm guessing that what's kind of happening here, and one of the reasons why the prosecutors are declining to do anything about it, and one of the reasons that the chiefs are not insisting upon this kind of stuff, is everybody hates to do extra training for your job.
Well, and they are also they're ideologically opposed to this training too. They're obstinate about like, I don't want my guys taking this, this soft shit.
Yeah, exactly. So you got the machismo in there. And so what's happening is that they're saying to themselves, this isn't important. We're going to ignore it. And, just, get your stuff in, get your stuff in. And then it goes to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor probably says to himself, well, I don't want to piss off the police, because I need them to help me get my wins so that I can keep getting higher and higher in the hierarchy. But two, this is just a technicality. It's not really that important. But we can see here from this case with Matthew Rhodes, yes, this is important. These officers are going out and doing insane things and killing people, and until very recently have been getting away with it. So, again, this is not just simply a technicality that people are using to mess with the police. This isn't like an activist problem that people are ignoring, and they will continue to ignore it until they are made to actually go through with the proper procedures. And
even if it was a technicality, like, people get their lives ruined over technicalities all the time, but what you're saying is that's why when I wrote this article, I didn't just write up about, that Matthew Rhodes killed someone. And like I was the only person who came to cover this, by the way.
Yeah.
Press releases were sent out to major, the Channel 19, like, who have done a lot of actual good coverage on Euclid. The only reporter who followed up on this was Cleveland.com. She's a relatively new reporter. She called Mariah after the press conference, talked to her for like 4 hours, and wrote up an article as best she could. And I'm not like kind of dissing her, but at the same time, like, I have spent cumulatively probably like 14 hours talking to Mariah and another like 8 just reading this material and combing through. I read the whole affidavit she submitted. So I can't fault, that journalist for kind of like skimming the story. And the only thing that bothered me was she dedicated one paragraph to the Luke Stewart incident and actually used the word when Rhodes first got into the car and they began to tussle.
Yeah.
I tussle my son's hair. I don't tussle a man out of a car. Absolutely. Anyway, but I thought it was important to write out and recap what happened and what Rhodes did because of what you just said, because I think it shows that his training was completely deficient of anything that taught him how to de-escalate, handle a situation that didn't require force. All he's taught is force, firearms, force, when to use it, how to use it. Let's practice, and be ready to kill, as Dave Grossman teaches you.
Yeah. Well, and this is one of the worst things about how police officers are trained. I'm remembering one of my senseis in Kyokushin karate. He was taking a course with another higher level sensei. And one of the people in the class, one of the white belts that had come in, was a police officer. And what he noticed was that one of the things that Kyokushin karate does is it puts you into situations in kata and movements where you have to really actually stop and think about what you're doing. Because if you just kind of go with what feels natural for like a kata or something, it basically puts you into uncomfortable places to rewire your mind so that you are better at moving than what you would do beforehand. And what he noticed was that the police officer, whenever he got to a point where he didn't quite understand what was going on, didn't really know what the movement, he would subconsciously reach for a gun, even though he's got no gun. He's in the thing. It's just, if he felt confused or, that hand would go back. And, you know, the thing is that, again, we're training these officers in a way that is not conducive to what they are supposed to do, which is serve and protect. Now, we've got some stuff going on here in the chat really quickly. I wanted to read. This is Mustache Bob, friend of the pod.
I like Mustache Bob. You introduced me to him. I like following him on Twitter.
Oh, great. Yeah. He's terrific. And we're going to be doing the 6th chapter of Homage to Catalonia soon. He says, Bobby B is saying the Army is trying to do away with online courses for the same reason. And they only ever use online as a supplement. So it's good to see that the Army is at least catching on to this. We also have Phoenix Force in the chat. I'm not surprised the police do these things as sick as it is. Me being white, I've been stopped and harassed for simply pulling my hood up in winter, saying I was being suspicious. You know, I remember like when I went to Occupy the Democratic National Convention and had like 15 freaking cops roll up on me and a couple of other people like in a dark alleyway. It's terrifying. And like, a lot of people just don't have that experience with the cops, you know. Like I remember one of them like sidled up behind me, like uncomfortably close. Like,
they do that all the time. I've seen that done. That's a damn thing. That's, if it's not formally taught, they informally, like, oh, you know what you do? You walk up behind someone, startle them, and they might, I don't know, sometimes set up a pretense where you might do something where they can claim you tried to strike them or whatever. I don't know, but I've seen cops do that quite a bit.
Yeah. No, it's creepy. It's the kind of thing that like a dude in a skeezy dude in a club is that's the move that I'd seen before that. I'm just like, is this guy trying to like, I don't think the cop is going to kiss me, but there's that whole, you know, kiss or kill distance. You know, so I wanted to bring that up. We also, it looks like we have a troll in the chat who saying,
it wouldn't be the internet if there weren't a troll.
Yeah, certainly not. None of what you're discussing here is relevant at all with what recently took place here. I don't know what you're referring to.
Recently? He was killed in 2017.
Yeah, so he had a weapon. Why do you conveniently disregard key details when
Whoa. Luke Stewart did not have a weapon, asshole. You want to go read all of the court transcripts I have? Listen to the police depositions, the BCI report. You want to read that? There's no weapon here. You can fuck off with that.
Yeah, and even if he had a weapon, they attacked him while he was asleep in the car and did not identify themselves as police officers. So even if there were a weapon involved in this, he would have had no chance to use it, and the cops did not find any weapon or had any reason to suspect there was a weapon. They just
you can bet damn sure they'd have mentioned a weapon. I'm sorry. I don't know where you are inventing that Luke Stewart had a weapon. He did not.
I have a feeling this is just a person getting triggered and coming in because you know, it's also weird with that whole, like, he had a weapon thing, like, where they're like, there was the shooting in Kenosha where they were like, oh, he had a knife. And, like, freaking every white guy I know has a knife in their back pocket, particularly, like, in the South. So, you know, and then also just the whole concept of they can plant a weapon. They're freaking cops. So we have that. Mustache Bob also. He says, hey, Beezy.
Hey, back at you, Bob.
Yeah, we got Steve Lundberg, evening Desp. That's targeted at me. Evening, Steve. Good to see you out there. And Mustache Bob, their ROE is so much more lax than the ones in Afghanistan. It's nuts.
Rules of engagement. The rules of engagement.
So the police officers' rules of engagement are way laxer than the rules of engagement in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I've heard that from many a military veteran talking about, like, wow, what we had to go through to fire a bullet, which is shocking that they're more stringent about who you're killing in a war zone in a foreign country than, right in our own cities. So as far as this story, like I said, I'm the one who's, as far as I know, gone as deep into it as anyone has at this point. Cleveland.com has done some coverage of the work Mariah did, previously too in East Cleveland. But to my mind, the only way that this story actually, though, gets could become the threat that I think it is if enough people learn about it and the prosecutor can't just shunt it aside.
Yeah, no, yeah,
So,
exactly.
this is why I'm like reaching out to you. I'm like, Brent, can I go on your thing? And I'm just like, I'm like, I got this is probably the first story where I'm like, everybody needs to see this story. And I'm just unabashedly like, get me on a show.
Yeah. Well, it's incredibly important. And I was very happy to have you on. You're always welcome on the program. What strikes me about this is how many officers do you think are out there right now that have had similar, like this law with them having to take this training and being ignored? Is this a state law or is that a federal law?
This is a state law, and yeah, I want to at some point, because I've been so in the weeds of it now. I want to go into the history of who passed this, because they probably gave us something. Like I said, this could be something really great for Ohio, for a lot of cases to see justice.
Yeah. Now we've got, this is fascinating for the internet also. We've got from LTD9392. I wasn't trolling. I apologize. I believe you're talking about something else. My fault. Thank you, dude. It actually, yeah.
Sorry, I jumped down your throat, but I had no tolerance. I'm so close to this case, and I feel for Luke, and I don't want to hear anyone talking shit about something I've had my head in for months now.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that people, a lot of this stuff becomes like highly publicized, and people forget that these are people involved in this. And like the thing that I always think back to is that like a human was killed, like a person was ripped out of society violently, and like I lost a friend at 25, and it wasn't violent or anything. Like he went to sleep one night, he didn't wake up. That hole that left in my life became like a major catalyzing event of my life, and I turned it into something positive. I mean, you talk about like positive transformation after trauma. That's what led me to hike the Appalachian Trail and move to New York City, where I met Beezy, and a lot of things. But the fact is that what I was doing at that point was I was turning poison into medicine, and the negative fallout of tearing someone from their community. It's not just the police did something wrong, or it is every person that he interacted with, every person that loved him has been hurt by this, and all of the things that he might have gone on to do in the world, all of the good that he might have gone on to do has been ripped out. It is a disgusting thing, and we get desensitized to it because of how the media treats death and how stories and video games treat it, because we get this abstracted version. But in reality, this is a tragedy that it's almost unspeakable. And it's easy to not think that because of just how crazy other things have gone. But yeah, what were you saying, BZ?
Well, you make me think of like one of the things that really just tugged at my heart was when we interviewed his sister Tara, who she was in the military too. So she had a lot to say about how inappropriate it was for there to be humor in that sort of training. But one of the real tragedies of this thing, Luke died on her daughter's birthday.
Oh no.
So that day is always, she said, like, it's not like you're going to forget a day like that. Like, but it might happen where you're like, oh, this is the day Luke died. She's like, I'm never going to forget it now. I'm never going to forget that that's the day. And also the fact that they found out he had been killed, like, they saw that there was a shooting on the news and we're like, hey, that looks like Luke's car. And they had to go through all these hoops and go down to the station, and they were cagey about it to just find out that he had been killed.
Yeah, that's one of the most awful things I can think of. And again, this is something that was completely avoidable. Like literally just a little due diligence on the officer's part. Knock on the window. Yeah. Hello, I'm an officer. I'm a police officer.
Yeah, and I have no tolerance for any of the victim. The victim should have done this, or like Luke shouldn't have drove anywhere or whatever. Because I'll say this: while I do find it highly plausible that Luke could have thought he was getting robbed, did not know that these were police at all, given the history of the Euclid police, I think he was justified in trying to get the fuck away from them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I would say absolutely.
Or at least that being his knee-jerk reaction, like, oh God, the Euclid cops.
Yeah.
And Luke wasn't and the other thing, Luke wasn't a saint. You know, he was in the game, so to speak. But that's, again, it was nothing that rose to the level where it's like he should have been violently attacked like that. But I think part of his history, and he had evaded the cops before, I think there was some revenge here, probably. I don't think it's implausible to think that maybe these officers recognized him and like, we're sick of him getting over on us. Let's do the community a favor and take him out. This is all my supposition, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but when I sit there and imagine like the scenarios of how this could have gone down deliberately, it's not hard.
Yeah. I mean, I find I try not to chalk up to malice what can be more easily explained by incompetence.
Certainly.
But like that's definitely something that can and does happen. We had the what was, I think, revealed to essentially be a police hit on that guy in Portland who that's straight up boy. Yeah. Or the Patriot Prayer guy, like there is evil in the world, and some of that evil comes from the police. Just, not saying all of it does, but I am saying that, people really, and it's so weird because I remember seeing this in the Cecily McMillan trial when they were doing jury selection. One of the things that people don't realize, because everybody's like, well, a lot of these shootings are like, oh, they're ruled as justified. Well, here's the thing. So when Cecily was going up, and hers was much more lower stakes thing, just a wayward elbow to the eye of a cop who, by the way, later lost his job for gross police misconduct. But he had a history of police misconduct that they tried to bring out in the trial, and the judge wouldn't let it in. But when they were doing their jury selection, one of the jurors, anytime somebody who might have been a juror said anything to the effect of, well, sometimes the police can be wrong, boom, gone. You're not on the thing. They want like the most naive officers are always right people serving on these juries. So here in Ohio, like right around the corner in Jefferson County, they have actively sought to make sure like no black person ever ends up on a jury. Yeah. So we have here Mustache Bob. Good to see you again, Bobby. There's so many shootings, people get confused. That alone should lead to massive reform. I agree. I'm sick of seeing this happen. And, this on killing thing is, I cannot understate like how dangerous it is. One of the things he's taught every single law enforcement agency in the country, I believe, or at least in every city, and he's been doing it for 2020 years. That's the other thing to point out. He says, "Hey, I'm a Green Beret. I'm an expert in killology. You guys will love it." And the machismo, and people just eat it up. But like then we have Steve. Well, again, this is just another example of lack of training and empathy and how to deal with people in that type of situation. Yeah, I agree 100%. So, like, all in all, I guess, what's the takeaway here? Is this person finally being, held to account, or is he going to get away with it? Well, like I said, this is sort of the opening shot, and where it goes from here is it's going to get passed over to Euclid municipal judge. I believe it's Patrick Gallagher. He's going to look it over. Mariah believes, judges never want to have their hands on it as being the one who squashes something. So he probably will forward it to the prosecutor. And then the onus is on him to actually investigate, bring it into a grand jury. And so it's like none of that provides optimism, but at the same time, this woman's relentless and she's tenacious and very smart. So, and I think, that's why I think the most important thing right now is to try and get this story out there as much as possible. It could be, this is a system-wide failure for Ohio law enforcement. If there are that many officers who have been able to skate around training that was mandated by our state legislature, it's just rampant lawlessness, and it has to be addressed. It's not a technicality just because it involves looking at spreadsheets and training certificates and whatever, but they have not followed the letter of the law, and they should be held to the same standard every citizen in this state is. Yeah, I agree 100%. And a lot of people are like, you see that Blue Lives Matter, line, which is, I hate that, because that thin blue line flag did not exist until Black Lives Matter. It doesn't really mean Blue Lives Matter. They're not working to prevent cops from committing suicide, for instance. They're not working to help with domestic violence situations with cops. They're just saying shut up to BLM. That's all that means. It means shut up. And like, what people constantly are like, oh, what, it's so dangerous out there for officers. Can't you? It should be, like, in the sense that it should be more dangerous for officers, and that officers should be held to a higher standard than the general public. They are supposed to be warriors. They're supposed to protect us. And the fact of the matter is that if the onus is not on the person with the gun, but the general public, to avoid getting into these situations, you essentially have an institution that is not only corrupt, but doesn't do the thing that it's supposed to do. Because again, like, you need to hold people in higher, the higher your authority rises and the more power you have, the more you must be held to account. Because if you don't do that, what's going to happen is abuse is going to happen, and mistakes are going to happen, and people are going to die when it's a case of somebody that is actually armed and has the ability to take life. And Zevin X, you are less likely as a cop to be murdered than as a taxi driver. Indeed.
Yeah. Say it again. And also, I mean, what people are like, how, if we abolish the police, how are crimes going to get solved? Well, first of all, like, I don't think anybody's saying, like, we don't want detectives who actually investigate thoroughly murders and rapes and major crimes, but this whole proactive policing approach is really the problem, like being out there, like, just as like a preventative force to just keep people in line. And there's a million, like, there's so many different types of calls police are responding to that they just don't have the training for. And Mariah said, like, throughout all of Ohio, there's only 4 departments that have actually shown her they're taking their training seriously. I forget the name of the one, but like, they even make sure every single one of their officers is at least trained in CPR and things like that, so that, like, they can revive someone they might kill, and takes all of the de-escalation training and takes that seriously. But a lot of these police departments, it's like they're little fiefdoms, and they get to pull shit the way they want to pull shit, and they're not getting held to account by legislatures. They're not being held to account by the prosecutors. And the other thing is just the clearance rate of police departments is abysmal throughout most of the country. Like, what are we even getting for this?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. And this actually reminded me of what I wanted to say on this, but then I just lost it because clearance rate knocked it out of my head. So I'm going to go quick to the comments, and then hopefully I'll remember what I was going to say. We have from Mustache Bob: every care must be taken that our auxiliaries, being stronger than our citizens, may not grow too much for them and become savage beasts. That's Plato, not Mustache Bob. Mustache Bob. Wow.
Mustache Bob invoking Plato.
Yeah, invoking Plato. This was what I wanted to bring up. So I had a debate on Black Lives Matter versus this guy T-Jump, who I've debated with, who unfortunately was affected by neo-Nazi propaganda, probably through Sam Harris. And one of the things that we kept settling on, we were arguing about, was, what is the cause of police shootings? Is this just police stupid, or is there a racialized element? Of course, there's a racialized element. But the thing that I found when I was doing some auxiliary research afterwards was I found a study that said that one of the things that correlates with fatal police shootings is the presence of an armed populace. The more people who have guns in an area, the more likely cops are to shoot and kill.
I'd like to see that. Yeah.
I'll send it to you. Yeah. Which, nobody talks about it because Republicans love cops and love guns, and Democrats love cops. So nobody wants to bring this up, that an armed populace, it's essentially what they speculated on in the study, is that a cop who feels threatened is more likely to shoot and kill. And this, by the way, held true whether the person they shot was actually armed or not. So the killings of unarmed people go up in areas where the population is heavily armed, or more heavily armed than areas where they're more disarmed.
That's interesting, because I recall a portion of Grossman's training was, talking about some incident. I forget which country, or maybe it was Israel, or, but he says in his presentation, the solution we need is armed people everywhere.
Oh no! Did Grossman said that?
Yeah, I have like a 300 tweet thread where when I watched his 3-hour training, and I just live tweeted and paused every single brainworm that I saw come out of his face.
Oh my God. This is an insane ideology, because people don't think about like the effect that being armed has on people psychologically. They don't consider the fact that, I've made several arguments with regard to guns and being armed and being not armed, some tongue-in-cheek trolling, but also kind of serious. But people, they don't think about, for instance, the more guns there are around, the more like if you have a gun, you are more likely to kill yourself.
Yeah,
because and suicides go way up in states where more people are armed. So the presence of these kinds of weapons sets a tone, and that tone can lead to greater degrees of killing. In this case, the reason I was tying it back to you is that this Grossman jackass is going around telling police officers that their lives are in danger constantly, that they need to not be the officer that gets shot.
Yes.
Because, oh, I'm being too precious with protecting people and I'm not 100% sure. Again, it's like what the study found: when they feel threatened, they're more likely to shoot and kill. So, big brain take on that. But when Grossman is making them feel threatened in his training,
the first third of it is him just talking about things like he'll just go off about like he just speculates on like terrorist attacks he can imagine or things like that. Like it's all just gets you into a heightened state of fear in the first third, and then the second third is talking about like what to do in combat. And then he also spends a really inordinate amount of time in the presentation on sleep deprivation, which I'm not saying isn't a problem, but he thinks that's the main culprit of officers making bad decisions, is they didn't get enough nap time.
I mean, I would be down with a siesta. It's fun.
And it was the other thing that came up in one of my interviews with Dr. Montgomery. When he was first looking into Euclid, he enrolled in their Citizens Police Academy program. And he said that day one, the first thing they tell everyone is like, well, as police, we use our senses to tell when someone's about to commit a crime. And goes on to list things like window tint, loud mufflers, loud music. If you have anything obstructing your license plate sticker, and hey, guess what? When you buy a car from most dealerships, guess what they put around your frame or your license plate? A frame that might obscure the sticker slightly or whatever, all these innocuous things that are just used as pretense. Like with the Lamar Wright case, they're like, oh, he pulled into, a house we don't like, so we're just going to immediately assume that this person is up to no good.
Yeah.
And he also looked at the data and found that it's like in Euclid, about 80% of the use of force reports come from 20% of the cops.
Yeah. Which would then it's the cop, not the violent.
Yeah. And of, I think 105 uses of force in a certain period, or 108, 95 of them were black men.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, of course. It's like what they found in, Robert pointed this out, in Ferguson. And conservatives freak out when I bring this up. T-Jump actually kind of had a really hard time dealing with it in the debate. But it was and in another debate I brought it up, and the people were like, I need to see the source on that. Trump's DOJ found that in Ferguson, the police department, which had started as a slave catching organization, used police dogs. And they only used police dogs on black suspects. And that they found that not only did they only use the police dogs on black suspects, Trump's own DOJ found that the use of the dogs was not justified. They were not using the dogs because they needed the dogs. They were using the dogs to terrify and punish. And then people say, well, why defund the police? Why abolish the police? That's why. Because you've got this culture that, especially in the South, where they grew directly out of these slave catching organizations.
100%.
And that's why they used the dogs, because slave catchers used the dogs. And so, how do you break that culture? Well, you get rid of the institution and you build a new, better institution with better values. And so, I really feel like I'm glad that, defund the police and abolish the police is out there in the popular consciousness, but it's one of the first things that gets completely misinterpreted by every idiot, especially if they're conservative or more on they don't quite realize the problems that we have with these institutions. They don't realize the problems with holding officers accountable because of qualified immunity and the strength of police unions.
And it's frustrating that I hear mostly from liberals that are like, I don't like that slogan. It turns people off. It's like, then learn yourself something, stand up for it and explain it.
Yeah. Well,
because it's not hard to say we're going to take funds out of the police and we're going to put them into other things that'll actually help, that'll actually protect and serve people.
Mm-hmm. By the way, we have in the comments, Zevin X, is there a single heavily armed society that has a low murder rate? Even in medieval Europe and feudal Japan, swords were outlawed in cities. Good point. Though we had the counterpoint from Mustache Bob, Switzerland, the nice Germans. I would agree. It's interesting. I had a theory, and this is my half troll, half serious thing. I think what we need in the United States, if we're going to go down that rabbit hole of a well-armed society as a polite society, I think what we realize is that will also mean more suicides and more police shootings if we do it. But let's assume that we still want to do that. Let's make sure that the people who are armed, one, we don't have to wait and hope for a rich guy to be there to play Batman. If guns actually do prevent stuff, let's make sure that everyone gets access to them, because we don't want gun privilege. We want universal gun rights and universal gun ownership. And let's make sure everyone who gets a gun has to go through military training. And then you're 18, you go through military level training. You're issued, I don't know, a rifle and a sidearm, and you get a card that works like food stamps where you can use for ammo and accessories, and mandatory time off work every month to go to the shooting range and make sure that you're good with that gun. And I say that what we'll do with that is we will pay for that with a tax on the rich. And if you are against that, maybe the problem is not really guns. Maybe the problem is something else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my half troll that pisses off everybody when I suggest it. But it's surprisingly like the Swiss system, and I actually think it would be a good idea for the most part. Except of course for increased cop shootings and increased suicides, which I cannot account for. Let's see. Let's take a down. I carry a greaser can opener switchblade because they'll think I know what I'm doing. Yeah, that's a good self-defense tactic, Mustache Bob. Maybe they'll think you're going to sing at them. Yeah. Oh, and this was another thing I wanted to bring up. Stephen, thank you for this comment from Stephen Lundberg. Oh, so the cops acquired a spider sense when doing the training. This reminds me, did you see the documentary about Amanda Knox?
That name sounds familiar.
She was the American who was in Italy, and her roommate.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think on Netflix I saw that.
Yeah,
while
and
back.
like the cop, the detective in it, who like he had a pipe and he fancied himself Sherlock Holmes.
I forgot about that fucking cop. Oh man, he was a piece of work.
Yeah, and he's just like, I think it's her because
He was all gut.
yeah, all gut. He was just like, well, a woman would have covered the body or something because women have weak constitutions and want to, they
just make it up.
She must be a murderer.
I remember being my jaw dropping at watching that guy talk. I was like, wow.
Isn't it the same thing with the cops when they're like, oh, if you have tinted windows, if your car's license plate is slightly obscured, by the way, it also just
and Richard Hubbard, who is probably the most infamous victim of the police, he wasn't killed, but he was brutally beaten, and that went extremely viral. If you just search Richard Hubbard Euclid, you'll see the video. A bystander shot it and the dash cam was released. But that episode, I just lost the thread. What were we just talking about?
Amanda Knox and the cops and with regard to like how they profiled people that they thought were likely to be violent.
Oh yes, no, the pretense for stopping him, he didn't like. He stopped ahead of that white line at a stop sign. He like rolled a little bit past that. He rolled past that a little bit and didn't stop, and then made a right turn. Where there's not even like a stop sign where it matters if you're making a right turn. There's nothing dangerous about it at all. And they stopped him. He got a beating solely because when they told him get out of the car and they put him up against the car, and the guy like slightly was like, "What are you doing?" And just a slight little like resistance of turning around, like, "Why'd you shove me?" turned into like throwing him on the pavement and kneeling on him and beating him mercilessly in the street.
Yeah. Well, it's that is nuts, and unfortunately, it happens too often. I think it's I actually brought this up, and in a weird way, this is going to tie into the next comment that I'm going to read, and also my play North to Maine, which I think you've seen. Did you see?
Oh yeah, I love that play.
Yeah. So we have from Phoenix Force. I don't carry a gun, but I go out late at night with walks, and I take my K-bar knife with me, military combat knife. So fun fact that ties into my play North to Maine is when I was on the Appalachian Trail, I was really like worried about going into the woods by myself because 20 miles out in the woods, there's no police, who knows what could happen. And so I went to a knife store and I said, I need a knife that is useful for fighting off murderers and bears and hillbillies and opening cans. And they gave me basically like a tactical, like it wasn't quite a K-bar, but it was like a K-bar. And I remember I would wear it and I got made fun of for having it my first like week on the trail, because I'd come in and people would just be like, "Are you carrying a sword?" And so in North to Maine, if you watch the play, when the character comes in, he's got
I remember that knife. Yeah,
and he's like, "What's wrong with my knife?" And he's like, "It's a freaking saber."
I remember that. Everyone's making fun of him. Way to turn self-deprecation into good drama.
Absolutely. And in
he was knives. I think there's a Twitter thread a couple of weeks or 3 weeks ago. It was going around just talking about like what it is to like get in a knife fight, and like, if you're fighting someone with a knife, you're not walking away without severe, the way it detailed what like it is to get into any sort of scrape with a knife just made me like, oh my God, I'm like more scared of someone with a knife than a gun now.
Yeah. Somebody's getting hurt in that. I had a knife pulled on me at Dragon Con of all places. There was a guy who was like part of the hotel cleaning staff or something, and I guess he was on some sort of work release program or something. And he grabbed this woman and was like abusing her. And me and like three other guys saw it and came by and were like, "Ma'am, do you need help?" And she said yes. And so we're like, "Okay, sir, step back." And he pulls a knife. And I remembered I was sitting there and I had just taken a karate self-defense class from this guy, Sensei Gene Dunn, I believe, who does some amazing work with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Kyokushin. And he had talked about how you needed like essentially a praying stance at the beginning where you have your hands in front of you like this because it doesn't read as aggressive And it's like, buddy, you know, I don't want to fight, but you have your hands in exactly the position to where you can block or attack if you need to. And so like I'm sitting there and I'm like, sir, please calm down. And I'm just like got that script running through my head. Luckily, it broke apart and the cops came, and I think the people that he was working with hid him. I don't know if the cops ever found him. And it was really depressing, actually, because then the woman recanted, even though she was very obviously being abused by this guy. But, you know, what's going to happen? He goes to jail, then he comes home and he beats her up or something.
Yeah, I think I remember that story when that happened.
It was crazy. I still felt good about myself.
You should.
But yeah, anyway, what I was getting at with the North Temain and kind of with this situation is that kind of conflict de-escalation, just like what you had with Sensei Gene, with the praying hand motion. It's crazy that martial artists are getting better trained to deal with conflict de-escalation than freaking cops, like who have guns and go out and deal with that kind of conflict every day. It's also like, again, like when we're talking about guns and weapons and an embattled mindset, like one of the characters in North Temain is Kevin, who is based on a real Marine from Vietnam that I knew, who had been like a tunnel rat, and he told a number of crazy stories. And a lot of the stuff that Kevin says came straight from Kevin, like the actual one that I knew on the AT. And one of the monologues that he says when he talks about why he doesn't carry a gun in the woods, because everybody tells, like when you're planning a thru hike, everybody tells you go carry a gun. He says, you know, the worst thing about guns, you know, they're heavy, they're illegal in national parks at the time until Obama got rid of that. Thanks, Obama. But, you know, and you're not really going to use them for anything out there. But I think like the worst thing that they do is what they do to our spirit. And it's not like some crunchy granola, you know, hippie spirit. It's the spirit of the hiker community. It's the spirit of the person that is carrying the weapon in the first place, because you put a gun in a man's hand and there is always a part of his brain that's thinking about how and when he's going to use it. He can become afraid, introverted, and suspicious. It is not worth having them, at least not on the Appalachian Trail. And so I really feel like, you know, a lot of the time we as a society are incentivizing these negative interactions with police in a number of ways. And one of them is possibly through the proliferation of weapons, and not just the proliferation of weapons, but also the proliferation of this embattled mindset where they feel they're trained like they're soldiers by a former soldier, you know, dealing with, and apparently they're not trained as well as soldiers, you know, and thinking of the public as enemies that they are occupying, as opposed to people they are trying to protect and serve. Yeah. Mustache Bob, the sword itself incites to violence. That's another Greek. Cool. I channeled a Greek without knowing it. I'm gonna take full credit for that. Right on. Cool. So I love the chat. I've got a bunch of sword and ninja nerds in the chat now, which is exciting. I carry a 16-inch kukri as a tool, and I work forestry in Michigan. Dude, I am so jealous of you, Zevanex, that you get to work forestry. That's one of the career paths I almost chose, and I kind of miss. You should check out my play North Temain if you get a chance.
I can vouch for that. It's a fantastic play. I've used parts of that as a monologue for audition. I enjoyed being a part of staged readings and watching it. It's
I had
excellent show.
Didn't you?
Yeah, man.
In Damascus, you were phenomenal.
You got to smoke more or less weed. I don't know what's happening with your brain.
It's not the weed. It's CBD.
Oh, okay. It's weed light.
Weed light, that is legal. Yeah, I should smoke more weed, honestly.
Sort of legal. There's still places where you can get in trouble if they find it in your system in certain instances.
That's why when my son was born, all drugs gone. And they are not coming back until he's out of the house, as far as anyone knows. So, all right. Well, this is great. I'll tell you what, we've been at this for like an hour and a half almost.
Yeah.
Do you want to plug your pluggables, BZ?
I could. Well, I know times are tight. If you can support me on Patreon, that's always appreciated. But right now, I'd really appreciate all the YouTube subscribers I could get. To crack that 1,000 so that I could start monetizing things like that. I'm 100% independent. My goal is to be 100% reader funded. I'm not looking to get a job with any agency, just so that I can be free to be my own editor. But yeah, if you can follow me on all the things, that's the best thing. And especially if you subscribe to me on Substack, that's where I'll be publishing more of these articles. Like I said, I think I have this story cornered at the moment. And it's great as Mariah and I talk almost, a couple times a day lately, just catch up on things. She's always keeping me in the loop on where things are going next. They're going to be filing more charges against other officers in Euclid and setting their sights on other departments throughout the state. So this story isn't going anywhere. And for it to really have potency, I hope it can bubble up to being made, that everybody in Ohio can be made aware of it. So if you know anybody in Ohio, tell them about the story, because it does affect you. And honestly, I'm going to be working with Mariah to help set her up with some sort of system, a website that can, because that's what I do to make money for the most part right now. I build websites on the side, and I told her, I'm like, I'd really like to take the reins, help you build out a good website that would allow people to submit, like, oh, I was arrested by such and such officer in such and such department. Were they in cease function when that happened?
Yeah, we can find out. Well, that's incredible. And you're host of the BZ Listening Podcast, which goes into some amazing local artists. And
if you want to learn all about this and meet Mariah, she was my interview subject 2 episodes back, and it's a really great deep dive we get into the weeds of all this.
Well, so everybody do that. Also, everybody subscribe to BZ's channel. I can tell you, having gotten into the YouTube Partners program, I'm kind of crying about it, because it's going to take a while to get to where like the money is anything that you can use, but it is a start.
What I can see, you're kicking ass. You blew way past my subscribers in no time. I've been on YouTube for years putting out content, and I never cracked 1,000.
Well, that's because I did the debates, I think, with Modern Day Debate, and also
you're getting yourself out there amongst other YouTubers, and I haven't really cracked that yet.
Yeah, well, let me know if you want to debate somebody. I think you might be good at it, but
I guess I'd have to do it to find out. I mean, I like getting into arguments, but I worry about like getting, gish galloped into something where I don't know how to call bullshit on bullshit when I see it, or how to quickly source something. So yeah, I guess if we're the right topic, I'd be happy to do it. But
yeah, we can talk about it if that's something you want to do. I can give you some tips. My biggest tip would be to avoid doing anything with conspiracy theorists, because they just gish gallop and they're out of their mind. But other stuff like the political stuff, I think you might actually be able to find your niche really easily.
I don't know. I think I'd have more fun debating a conspiracy theorist than just mocking them for.
That is true, and that is a tactic one can take.
Yeah.
All right. So and for you guys, if you have not liked, commented, or subscribed to my channel, please do, because again, I'm trying to do my best to make it through this whole COVID time. Also, if you can, get a copy of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, the 2nd issue of which is out, and I will be launching a Kickstarter for the 3rd in November. I believe I'm waiting until after the election, because I don't want it to get swallowed by the election, but I should be launching the one for by November 10th is my goal to get this out. And there's going to be a bunch. The series has been nominated. It was nominated for 2 Ringo Awards. We did not win, but I was happy. We actually, one of the Ringos that we lost to the guy from Usagi Yojimbo. Which like that dude's a freaking legend. So I'm okay losing to that. And also Colleen Duran, who works with my personal favorite author, Neil Gaiman. We lost out to her book, Snow Glass Apples, which was
good company, man.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. It was a direct inspiration of Snow White Zombie.
Yeah, I love the comic. I got to get my hands on issue 2.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do. Well, there's the Kickstarter coming up, and I'm sure we'll work something out because I got to overhaul my website. And people have actually been asking me on.
You do need a new as a person who built your website like a decade ago. I can tell you need a new website.
I really do. People have come in into the.
I did not know what I was doing at all compared to like now. Like,
well, that's excellent. We'll figure it out. We'll be able to get the blog up there, maybe the YouTube synced into it, and else. So let's talk about that really soon. All right, well, guys, thank you all so much. This was BZ Douglas, and please look into this killing. If you are a reporter out there or a reporter, please get them turned on to this, because BZ has the thing cornered on it, but I believe that's not what you want, right? You'd like more people to be talking about this.
No, yeah, I've been when I first put out my interview with Mariah, I was like tagging a bunch of journalists I knew, just being like, does anyone want to write? Because this is a beast of a story to write, and this is just the first of what, if it's going to be mine, it's going to be a lot of articles about this. So and it takes a while to wrap your head around. So if you're interested in this, get into it now.
Absolutely. And you and I, we can talk about the website, and we'll talk about the YouTube Partners Program after this. Zevinx, thank you very much. Thank you, Phoenix Force. Thank you, Steve Lundberg, Mustache Bob.
Oh, I want to thank Zevinx and Colin Lorenz. They subscribed to me, I imagine, from watching. Sweet. Very much appreciated.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Colin is great. I didn't read Colin's thing, actually, and I should have. Colin was making fun of the guy who was, I thought, who apologized for trolling, being like, if only the article was linked in the description. Oh, so that's really cool. All right. So from me here at Insurrection to all of you, keep your eyes up. Keep asking tough questions, and keep making the argument for a better, saner world. This is Brenton of Insurrection with Brenton Lengel signing out.
Bye-bye.